Hi, everybody. Welcome to National News Literacy Week, Kansas City edition. This is Friday. If you're watching a recording, it's Red Friday because it's the day before the AFC Championship right here in Kansas City. So we're just going to say, go Chiefs, really quick. We are so glad you could join us here today. This is National News Literacy Week. It's sponsored at the national level by the News Literacy Project and EW Scripps. And here in Kansas City, it's brought to you by your local journalists and the Kansas City Public Library and American Public Square's Civic Education Initiative. I'm Jenny Garman. I am the Legal and Government Specialist for the Kansas City Public Library, and I get to connect you to legal and government resources when they could have the answers to the questions that you have. That means I get to be a part of strengthening civic engagement here in Kansas City, and that is really important to me. I'm so glad to be here with you. Because news literacy is such a broad topic, for this week, we decided to hone in on three focus areas: democracy, which was Monday, disinformation, which was Wednesday, and distrust, that's today, that's this Friday. I'm excited to see participants, so excited to see participants today from Kansas City, from St. Louis and beyond. And some of our participants are local high school students. That is thanks to Tricia Maxfield, who leads the American Public Square Civic Education Initiative, where she helps students think about how we evaluate misinformation, disinformation, and bias. Tricia, would you share a little bit more about that?
I would love to. Thank you, Jenny. And again, just want to say how thrilled American Public is that Jenny has gone to the effort she has this week to honor National News Literacy Week and to bring this kind of programming to everyone in Kansas City, especially students. At American Public Square, we strive to convene unlike-minded people to have fact-based civil discourse about really difficult topics. And obviously part of that endeavor comes from the journalists. So we support our local journalists, and we're glad to give citizens in Kansas City an opportunity to talk with them and get to know them. Our partner schools are up on the screen for this year. They work on a curriculum that has them consider 3 essential questions in the fall. Can we agree to disagree better? Not just agree to disagree. Are we deliberating or debating, and which one is more valuable or necessary to a democracy? And then finally, probably the biggest one that Jenny mentioned is, how do we evaluate misinformation, disinformation, and bias, even our own filter bubbles and our confirmation bias that we use as we consume media and news? This is the most urgent call that we hear from teachers and students, that they need more resources and more support in this way to teach what is now really part of a civics instruction. It may not be traditional 3 branches of government, but we know that students today really need this kind of time and concern to grow these skills. So thanks for having us, Jenny. We are excited for the conversation today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. And thanks also for your help and monitoring the chat. If you've just joined us, the program is being recorded, and we will be making time for your questions for our panelists. So that brings me right here, these reminders. We're also hoping that captioning will be available after this recording is published to the library's YouTube channel. And we will be mentioning some resources, quite a few resources in this session. I will send out a wrap-up email with links to all of those resources, and you can also contact me at jennygarman@kclibrary.org if you have any other questions or comments. Let's get started. And if you're a repeat customer, I'll repeat some of the definitions and some of the things that we've talked about on Monday and Wednesday, just so everybody has sort of the same experience if you're just tuning into one particular recording. You joined us knowing that news literacy has a vital role in our democracy, and that this week is part of an enduring effort. This is the 3rd National News Literacy Week in America. I'm so excited. We bring local journalists to the table with you, and we want to inspire you as a news consumer to practice news literacy. And as we wrap up this week, it's been a great week. It's a good time to reflect on news literacy as essential to the strength of our democracy, to countering disinformation, and as a remedy, at least that's how I look at it. We'll see what you all think, as a remedy to distrust. We've all seen that facts and evidence and truth are right alongside the disinformation, misinformation, rumors, and viral hoaxes, and everything that we read and see and hear in our daily lives. And I think we all can acknowledge that that can be pretty overwhelming at times. But we can learn to, separate the truth from falsehoods with news literacy in our toolkit. It's like flexing your puzzle solving abilities, which is why I love that picture. You'll identify credible information, you will seek out reliable sources, and you will apply critical thinking skills to separate fact-based content. I emphasize that a lot in these sessions, fact-based content from falsehoods. According to the News Literacy Project, news literacy is the ability to determine the credibility of news and other content. It includes the ability and knowledge to identify different types of information and to use the standards of fact-based journalism to determine what to share and trust and act on. Becoming news literate also means recognizing the critical role of the First Amendment and a free press in a democracy. People of all ages and backgrounds with news literacy skills can be more active in their communities and more equal and engaged participants in civic life. And I get excited when I think about people becoming more active because they have information that they know they can rely on and they know that they can act on. As the legal and government specialist, I really want to connect you to your local elected officials, to information that can help you. News literacy impacts every facet of our lives. We do depend on accurate, reliable, and current information for our democracy, but also for our health, for our finances, for our decisions, even on just where we go and who we consider trusted sources of information, so much more. And what is the News Literacy Project? If you haven't heard of them before, hopefully you've visited my critical thinking and fact-finding page. I use a lot of their resources. They are a nonpartisan national education nonprofit providing programs and resources for educators and for the public, that's you and me, to teach, learn, and share the abilities needed to be smart, active consumers of news and information and equal and engaged participants in our democracy. Let's go ahead and get started with our program focus on distrust. And I want to share this quote from Maria Ressa as she accepted her Nobel Peace Prize last year, 2021. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, no democracy, and it becomes impossible to deal with our world's existential problems. So distrust is a big issue. I'm so excited to be joined today by our special guests, Matt Evans from KMBC and Emily Wolf from the Kansas City Beacon. Would you go ahead and introduce yourselves, please, and share with us what you love about reporting here in Kansas City?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Like Jenny said, my name is Emily Wolf. I'm a local government accountability reporter with the Kansas City Beacon. And things that I love about Kansas City reporting, the list could go on and on, but I think it's a really valuable time to be reporting here in that it's such a sprawling metropolitan area and you get to talk to people from so many different walks of life and really make sure that their voices are being heard.
I'm Matt Evans. I'm a reporter and anchor at KMBC Channel 9, the ABC affiliate here in Kansas City. What I love about reporting in Kansas City is it's my hometown. I grew up about an hour and a half south of here in Clinton, Missouri. So anytime we would go to the city, we would come to Kansas City. So I grew up here. I love the people here. I love our area. I love how our local journalists here are much different than local journalists in a lot of different cities. A lot of time you hear about the cutthroatness of journalists, right? Especially in broadcasting. That is not the case here. I am good friends with many reporters and anchors at all of the different stations, because there is Midwest nice and then there is Kansas City nice, which is just a whole nother level. So that's why I love being here. This was my dream to work at this station. I grew up watching Channel 9 as a kid, and it has truly been a great 8 years in the field and in the studio with them. So yeah, and I love meeting people in our city because, as Emily said, you get to meet so many different people from so many different walks of life and tell their stories, which is really what our job is all about.
I appreciate that so much. I know in getting to meet other local journalists, they talk about being the storytellers and how they love working here in Kansas City. So that's a lot of love right here. I love it. So we're going to tackle a tough topic today. We're going to need all of the help we can get there. I want to just go over really quick with all of you. Oh, this is a busy slide, and I'm sorry about that, but I really want to make sure that we're clear what we're talking about when we say distrust in the mass media. And what Gallup has been studying trust in institutions since 1972, and we are at one of our lowest points since they started studying this. When they talk about trust in media, it's like, do you trust your newspapers, TV and radio to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly? So we're at 36% of people saying, yeah, I have a great deal or a fair amount of trust in mass media. I also wanted to highlight, we have local journalists today. We know from these surveys that news consumers say, if it's local news, I trust it. It's the national that I have a problem with. It's still an issue, and I feel like it's great to be able to be with you here today to talk about that. Lee Rainey of the Pew Research Center, he studies trust in media. And I typically don't read right off slides, but some folks are just tuning in over the phone. So I just want to make sure that everyone's has this available to them. People have lots of news sources that they trust, but they don't think that the institution of the news media and the industry of news organizations as a whole is trustworthy. And I've highlighted here some more of this quote from him. People tend to go to sources of information that map with their point of view. In other words, are we on the same page? Like, do you lean the same way I do? And what they're seeing, what the Pew Research Center is seeing in their data is that Americans don't even trust each other the way that they used to, that we don't have that same shared sense of facts that we used to. Something I want to highlight here, and what will be the answer to, kind of the seg into my first question, is Lee Rainey says, the charge to people who are in the thick of this new environment is to figure out how to help people find their way to the truth and not make it a hard job. They want to know what's going on. They want help doing it, and they are looking to journalists to help solve these problems. So that leads to my first question. Matt, I'll start with you. How does your work restore public trust in news and reporting?
I mean, quite simply, we try to do our very best to get the facts right in every story we touch. Whenever we do a story, it is not just me doing it. I work with producers and work with editors and work with a lot of different people. And that's really how we try to make sure we're telling the story in the best way we can. That's the essential role that we play is getting these stories out there. And how we restore the public trust is we try to do the best job we can. I think we've always done that. And I understand that it's a very polarized time we live in. And if you say one word or the other word, someone's automatically going to turn you off. But our job is to report the facts. And that's what we do. And hopefully, the more people understand that, the more trust we build in our product.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And like you, I know Emily's also reporting on legislative work and everything like that. It's really important to get that right. Emily, would you share how your work restores public trust?
Yeah, I'd really echo just about everything Matt said. But in addition to that, I think a lot of the work to restore public trust happens before we ever publish any news product, be that on air or on a website as the Kansas City Beacon is. I find it really important, especially when talking to news sources, to walk them through exactly what I do in my work, what that process looks like, why I'm talking to them. One of the best trust building questions I've learned as a journalist is just to ask them, frankly, what questions do you have about journalism? Have you been interviewed by a journalist before? And do you think we're missing something? These are all trust building questions that help them feel like they're actually a part of our process instead of a more extractive type of journalism where, you know, people always have this idea that journalists are just looking for that soundbite, looking for that quote, instead of really trying to get to the heart of the story.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I also sometimes I think I worry a little bit that if I say you need to trust your news sources, I want to make it super clear that I'm not saying that the opposite of distrust is trust, is accepting at face value what you see. And I have a lot on here and I apologize for that, but this is for you to consider at another, if you're watching this as a recording, if you're watching this with your class, news literacy as a toolkit could be a remedy for distrust, because you can figure out here what's going on. You don't want to stop being a critical thinker. You understand how to verify a news source as a fact-based source. You understand that there are standards that professional journalists adhere to, how to research what other news sources are saying about the same subject that's grabbed your attention. And then you'll make a decision about whether to trust the news source based on your findings, based on what you know. Maybe the most important word to highlight on this whole slide is stop. That when you feel your emotions engaged, when something just doesn't seem right, when your spidey senses are tingling, you stop and then you start looking into the source and the reporting practices and standards. I really appreciate, Emily, you've brought up how when you interview people, that you're saying, here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm doing it. And I want to kind of go a little bit more into the standards of professional journalism. This is something that the News Literacy Project has put together. It's just these 7. I know that there are a whole lot more if you belong to the Society of Professional Journalists. And I'll share that whole list. It's really quite extensive. What would you like people to know more about? What standards of professional journalism do you wish more people knew about?
I think verification is one of the most important things that gets overlooked when talking about news media. I'm not going to see a tweet that says, say, Mayor Quentin Lucas did something dramatic today, and just run with that and report it as though it was true. There's a long process of calling, for example, Lucas's office, talking to him about this, contacting the person that tweeted that. Oftentimes, if it's a bigger story that's going to take a little bit longer, it's a lot of public records requests. And then if anyone's trying to give me information, very much asking, where did this come from? And why are you giving it to me? As journalists, what we don't want to do is just amplify someone's vendetta for personal reasons. We really want to make sure that what we're publishing, A, is correct, but B, is in the public interest.
Thanks, Emily.
I agree with everything she said. And just to add that a lot of times journalists go through rigorous training through either schooling or on the job. You don't have to have a college degree to be a journalist. A lot of folks require it, but there are always going to be ethical standards that you will adhere to. We have our own ethical standards at our station that we adhere to. Almost every publication will have them. And if you break one of those standards, I mean, you're in trouble. So, and there's a lot of times that we try and say, how does this help Our job, as Emily mentioned, getting the information out to the public that will add to the public discourse. So, and there have been a lot of stories where it's like, well, I mean, that have been stopped because simply we don't want to give this person a megaphone, even if they're trying to raise a bunch of issues about things. So yeah, I mean, there is a very long process that goes into every single news story, either in broadcast or in print, and it's not something that we just make up out of thin air and put out there. There's a lot of process that goes into it. For example, when I work a normal reporting shift, my day starts at 9 a.m. and our first story isn't published until 4 or 5 that afternoon. So we're working on this story all day long. It's not something that we just come up with at 3:59 before our newscast. I don't know, that sounds pretty good. So there's a lot that goes into each and every story that you see on local news, either on broadcast or online, like the Beacon is.
And really quickly, Matt makes a great point about almost any news organization is going to have a very specific code of ethics that its journalists adhere to. When I first got to the Beacon, before I was even hired for sure, I was required to sign a code of ethics that clearly laid out how my organization deals with ethical conflicts, what I should be doing in my reporting, so on and so forth. It's a little bit of an issue in my mind that organizations aren't more upfront with exactly what they hold their journalists to. And I think local news organizations are doing much better with that now, saying, this is the code that our journalists adhere to, here's why, and here's how that's reflected in our reporting.
Thanks very much, Emily. I really appreciate that. On a side note here, we have a question from Elizabeth saying sometimes the issue is not accuracy of a story, but the choice of stories to present. Sometimes I hear about something and turn to local news media, but find spotty coverage. And the question is, could you talk more about how stories are chosen and how the editors function? That's for both of you.
Well, on the broadcast side, so for example, we try to focus a lot on local news over national news. We do include national news in our newscasts, but it is much less on there than, for example, our local news. So if it's something that you see maybe in the Washington Post or the New York Times, and you tune to your local broadcast station, you will not find that in-depth coverage on whatever's happening in Congress, oftentimes in your broadcast news, especially with us. How we choose stories every day, we get together with all the reporters, the photographers, the producers, our managers, and we have a long meeting. Reporters pitch story ideas, producers weigh in, our managers weigh in, and a lot of times is we try to look at what the big story of the day is going to be. Obviously, there's been a lot of reporting on COVID as of the last couple of years. So there's almost always a different angle when it comes to the pandemic that seems to be changing every day in some points. And then on top of that, there's been a lot of stuff going on in Jefferson City and Topeka the last couple of weeks as the legislatures have been underway. So we've tried to pay a lot of attention to redistricting maps and issues moving through them. And then that's always the question of how do we make that interesting to our viewers, because a lot of it's inside political baseball. So we try to find ways to tell that story by not maybe talking to politicians, but talking to people who live in those areas that might be affected. So at least that's how we try to kind of craft our news stories for the day. But the other problem is there will always be more news than reporters, almost always, especially at our shop where we had Michael Mahoney, our political reporter, 41 years, retire, last month. We had another reporter leave last month. We might have 3 reporters in a day to try and cover everything in Kansas City, which is simply far below what we would need, in my mind, to cover everything going on. But even then, I mean, you'd need an army of journalists to cover everything going on every day. So hopefully that helps a little bit on the broadcast side.
A lot of it's going to depend on the format of whatever news organization you're going towards. So I also have a broadcast background. I used to be a producer, so I kind of can tell you both sides of the field. With the Kansas City Beacon, for example, we're never going to do Dayturns. So on KMBC, for example, you might see really good coverage of a particular ordinance that just got passed, and they're explaining to you exactly what that ordinance is, who voted for what, so on and so forth. As a local government reporter for the Beacon, I'm focused on the story, not that day or the day after, but maybe a month from now or 2 months from now, to really focus on the more in-depth side of that. So you're never going to see me do a day turn unless if something incredibly insane happens. The other thing I'd say is a lot of times it's just, we need people to tell us what coverage they want. Most news organizations have a tip line, be that online, or you can call into the station or newsroom and just tell us what you're seeing. It's never going to guarantee that we'll say, oh, this is the top of our list for tomorrow, we'll get you a story out immediately. And I never want to promise that. But we're, like Matt said, we are a small group of people, and sometimes we just don't have all of the information. I know I've had a lot of stories that came about as a result of someone emailing me or texting me or DMing me on Twitter and saying, hey, this is an issue, why aren't you covering it? Usually the answer is we didn't know about it and we'd love to cover it. As on the editor side, in our newsroom, generally I'll speak with an editor before I go fishing, quote unquote, for any stories or any sources, to make sure that we think it's worthwhile to put my time and effort into, and that it will actually serve our audience. Sometimes that's a back and forth conversation. Like I'll pitch a story and they'll be like, I'm not sure that's the story you think it is. And then you explain yourself, go back and forth, say, here's the angle, here's why I want to tell this story, and here's who I would talk to. Editors are generally very good about having a conversation with their reporters. So most of the times an editor is not going to kill your story outright. They're just going to change the way you approach it.
I appreciate that very much. Those were great answers. And I would just remind, if you haven't, if you weren't with us on Monday, or if you haven't tuned into that recording, Dia Wall from KSHB echoed what you both were saying, which is you in a way, you get what you engage with, in terms of, hey, let me know, if there's something on your mind or something on your radar and you're not seeing it on local news, give us a holler, let us know. So it seems as if that's a great invitation to say, if you're not seeing something that you want to see, maybe it's because you haven't brought it up. And like you said, Emily, you can't promise anything, but at least knowing it's on the radar, it helps you rack and stack for stories, and for what might be coming up sometime later. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Speaking of stories and how they come about, one of the questions I have for you is, how do you as a journalist respond to people who say, oh, you're fake news, you're not, or you're reporting fake news? I wonder if that's part of your life and how you respond.
Funny enough, since I've moved to Kansas City, I don't think I've ever gotten that, which is rare for a journalist, knock on wood. I definitely have gotten it in other markets, but I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that I don't focus on political gamesmanship in my reporting or insider baseball, as Matt said earlier. I want to tell you the facts and I want to tell you how it impacts you. I think that goes a long way to helping people realize that there's not a particular agenda in my mind, or that it's not quote unquote fake news. I'm not here to bash any politicians or say, oh, their agenda sucks. I'm just going to tell you what impacts it'll have on you, and you take that information and make informed decisions as a result of it. I think the fake news trend, we tend to see more vitriol on social media than like when we actually go talk to people in their neighborhoods. It's very rare that I'll have someone in person that is outright unwilling to talk to me or not interested in my work. Social media kind of blurs the lines as far as what is acceptable behavior, because you don't have to say it to our face as journalists. And I understand that, but whenever people have questions about my reporting, or they're like, why the hell did you do this? I'm always more than happy to engage with them, either DMs, hell, just directly responding to a tweet or an email and laying out exactly what I did and why I did it.
I do get the fake news yelled at through the car on the way, down the street as folks are, we're doing an interview or doing a live shot or something, fake news, and they have no idea what we're talking about. We could be doing a story about, a happy puppy, and they'd yell fake news at me. They just see the news media and think automatically, oh, fake news. I don't respond to those people. I never have, and I never will. If someone wants to have a conversation with me, I'm always, as Emily said, more than happy to have that conversation. I get phone calls, I get emails, tweets, Facebook messages all the time. And if someone just emails me fake news, I do a lot of stories a week, you narrow it down, be great. But if someone has an actual question, hey, what does this stat mean behind your reporting? And something that I think that print and folks like Emily have a greater a leg up on broadcasters is they have a lot more room to do their stories. I get a minute 15. I get a minute 15. I got to have 2 sources in there. After 2 or 3 sound bites, that leaves almost no time to explain some of the intricacies of these stories. So a lot of people will ask, well, what about this or what about that? And those are answers I have, just answers I didn't have time for because I don't have the time to put them out there. So if it's something like that, I'm always happy to engage with people, but I try not to feed the trolls, so to speak, because they will always be there and people will always be upset with local media now, no matter what we do. So, but yes, I've often had to defend stories or explain, and yeah, it has happened more recently than ever before. I've been in this market for 8 years, and over the last 4 or 5 years, people have gotten a lot more brazen with wanting to come up to us on the street and shout at us or yell at us and things like that, which is something we just have to deal with. And luckily, I'm always with a photographer. If I'm in the field, we've got a team of 2. We hardly have anybody that's a one-man band or an MMJ. That maybe you've seen the reporter in West Virginia got hit by a car in a live shot. That wouldn't happen with us because we don't do those live shots. We don't do that because safety is super important. And I will say that fake news trend has made me a lot more aware of my surroundings in the field, because when you're sitting in a car, if I'm doing the morning show at 4 o'clock in the morning and you've got a Channel 9 on the side of it, sometimes that does make you a target. But most of the time I can at least try and figure out if they're upset and want to have a chat. I'm always happy to chat, but if they just want to yell at me, we'll just leave.
And as Matt mentioned, he's got a minute and 15 seconds. If you don't see something in his package that you think should have been covered in the story, it's probably in the web story. Just go check out their web story and you'll probably get more information. And if not, reporters are generally really happy to talk to you about those extra little bits they got in the reporting process that didn't make the final cut.
Thanks so much for that. I appreciate it. I'm curious, Matt, just as a follow-up question, do you find that with the people who send you the email or a Facebook connection, that when you explain to them, are they generally, oh, that's how that works, or that's why, yeah.
50-50. Some people might start out pretending maybe they're inquisitive and then trying to catch me, in a lie or something like that. And then they'll just say, well, you're wrong. Like, well, I'm not. I mean, here's the facts to back it up. I mean, you're more than welcome to look at all these yourself. These are all mostly, publicly sourced documents that we use. The other 50% are people that just, that had genuine questions. So, I mean, it kind of depends on, some people are just so ingrained right now in what they think is right and wrong, and are simply not open to listening to facts. And that's when I don't have much luck in having a fruitful conversation with them. But the people that are open, we sometimes have very good conversations. I've talked on the phone with a viewer for 30 minutes before about a story, trying to explain where we found this information, why we did this story this way instead of the way they thought it should be done. And at the end of the conversation, I think we both understood each other a lot better. So, I think it just depends on where that person who is reaching out to me is coming from. If they're coming from a place of truly, I want to understand this, then we can have a very civil conversation. If they're coming from the place of, I want to prove the media wrong and they lied about this, then there's rarely any times where we're going to have anything of any substance.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that so much. Trisha and I were talking just a little bit earlier, and I know Trisha works with local high school students. Trisha, you mentioned that they have a question that they wish they could ask journalists. Would you share that one?
I will, and I want to say too that I really appreciate the candor that Emily and Matt have both offered about this difficult question when we find ourselves in a very polarized climate. That has certainly impacted the job of journalists, and young people are interested in that question and their responses. How do they handle that challenge to facts? The next question that students usually ask is, what can we do to support local journalists? How do we take action to help build trust and relationships?
That's a really interesting and sweet question. I don't think we get that often. I will say the Beacon right now is working on building out a community engagement bureau that is designed to help everyday folks, be them students, various residents, tell us what they want to see more of in the community. I think as journalists, we find that really helpful because we don't want to just parachute in and say, hey, do you have a story for me today? Tell me your life story, and then you'll never hear from me again. We want to build meaningful connections. So anytime someone wants to help a journalist, the easiest way is just to talk to us. I know personally, I really prioritize talking to someone far before I am ever going to need them for a story. I have the advantage of longer deadlines versus a broadcast reporter where you've got multiple shows to fill. So having the opportunity to really just talk, hear from people, and don't be afraid to tell a journalist if you think maybe something could have been done better or they should be doing something differently. You just have to come at it with a respectful tone. Like Matt said, I do not suffer trolls. If you're just going to throw vitriol at me and not come with genuine questions, you will not get a response from me. And I don't feel bad about that. On the other hand, if you're like, hey, I noticed you had these sources, but not this. I think that perspective was really important because of this. Why didn't you talk to them? I'll talk your ear off. And sometimes we make mistakes. I think it's really important for journalists to own up to the fact that we are not perfect robots, and having those conversations makes us better at the end of the day.
Yeah, we do make mistakes. We do. And when we do make mistakes, we try to own it. But that is another part of this distrust, is that and in broadcast, I mean, we can make a little mistake. We can make a spelling error on a graphic, and people will be, oh, well, can't trust the media because they spelled that word wrong, and every little thing like that chips away at the trust, right? So it's really important that when we get things wrong, we own up to it. Which I think at Channel 9, we do a fairly good job at that. There's been several times where we've said, you know what, we shouldn't have reported that, or we shouldn't have done this. Or we make sure that our graphics are spelled right, and that's just human error. That's just the way it is, because we are humans. And that's another way you can support journalists too, is by understanding that we are humans. We live in this community. We care about this community. We are not trying to tear this community down. We live here. We're trying to tell the stories of this community and try to contribute to the discourse in our community. So, and another way that you can support people, I know the Beacon is a nonprofit organization. You can donate to the Beacon. You can subscribe to the Kansas City Star. You can subscribe to any of the hyper local, really good journalism newspapers and sources and sites that we have. The Shawnee Mission Post in Johnson County, the Northeast News. There's several in the Northland. I mean, there's a lot of really good hyper local stuff that you will see in your neighborhood that you will not see likely on the local news. If there's something that might be a big deal in your street or your neighborhood or something like that, those people will cover it really, really well because they are ingrained in those communities. So you can support a lot of local journalists that way. For us in broadcast, we you can't subscribe to us, but you can turn us on. You can watch the news anytime. And you can watch us for free, which a lot of people don't understand. Well, I don't watch TV. I don't have cable. You don't have to have cable to watch the local news. I don't have cable. We have an antenna. Our product is free. It is over the air. You can take that product at any time you want. And on top of that, our website is free. We don't have a subscription. Almost all of our news gets put out to our website completely for free. So, be engaged and like Emily mentioned too, is don't be afraid to approach us if you have an idea or if you just want to talk. We are normal people. We are normal people like everybody else. So that's a big way.
Thank you so much. Those are great answers, storytellers, and to not have that feeling of like, well, but you're somehow so far removed. No, I'm local. You can call me. You can email me. You can let me know, what's going on. And I appreciate that too, Emily. And I know that's the idea, being respectful, saying, I'm a human being here. You can treat me with civility. This is important. I am gonna surprise our guests here, our participants here, because I want to turn it kind of over to them. I've always encouraged, questions in the chat, like, hey, if you don't mind being part of the recording, share any questions that you have. I'd love to know, and maybe if Matt or Emily, if you wanted to start us off just to kind of break the ice, what can the library do? What can I do to help you as a news consumer, as somebody who wants to make this connection to news literacy, to learn more about this? What's something I can do? What's something the library can do that would help you?
The library is already a really good partner with a lot of local media. You guys do a lot of great work in the community, and you let us know about it. So, that's check that box off. But we always, and if there's ever anything that you hear of or you want to know, you can call us and you can tell your patrons, obviously, that you can always reach out to the media and tell us about things, and nothing that you tell us has to be on the record. That's what a lot of people are worried about, is that, well, if I call the news, it's going to wind up on the 5 o'clock news. Well, it doesn't. So as we mentioned, there's sources and a process and like that. So I think people are often concerned that they're going to get in trouble if they reach out to the news. If there is a genuine concern that somebody has that something is wrong or something needs to be changed, but they want to bring attention to it, but they don't want to be a part of it for obvious reasons. They're afraid of retribution or being fired, things like that. We have tip lines. We have investigative reporters. And we're always looking for those tips because, as Emily said earlier, sometimes we simply don't know about the story until someone tells us. So I would say, just to make sure that people understand that there's no reason to be fearful of the news, is that we are not going to just take whatever tip you send us and put it right out there, and get you in trouble or anything like that. If you come to us and say, this is a story, please don't, use my name or something like that, we're not going to, go against your wishes. So just people to not be afraid to talk to us, because like we've said several times, is we're normal people.
I would say the library currently does a really good job of helping level the information playing field for everyday people. I'm on a journalist salary, which, for those of y'all that don't know, is not very high in just about any market, unless if you're in national news. And I understand it can be very expensive to subscribe to, say, the Star, other papers, and like constantly have that on your bill. The Kansas City Library provides you that for free through Newsbank. I always want to plug that because I've had folks say, hey, I think the story in the Star that you linked to is interesting, but I can't reach it. And I hate that. I think everyone should be able to read stories that matter to them. So check out your local Newsbank. I also think the library, just doing programs like this is really helpful. I love seeing the chat just like link up and have this response. It's really nice to be able to talk to people face to face or remote face to face rather than just over emails or chats.
I appreciate that. We're a lot closer than we could possibly be in a room together anyway. Who was that again? Yeah, I can really see you. I really get to know you. So I appreciate this. And I love this. Anne is sharing, does the library do programs for elementary school children around the topic of whom do you believe and how do you know whom you can believe? And I'm taking that as an action. And I will propose that. We love getting ideas, just like news reporters. Hey, did you have an idea for a program? Is there something missing from what we're offering? Hey, you let us know, and we want to make that happen because we serve you here in Kansas City, and we're really proud to do that.
And Jenny, if I could add a quick comment, just as an educator and somebody who works with teachers, I too love that question from Anne, and I would say one thing that we can all do is, as we support journalists, that we support teachers and our schools, and that we ask, what is your civics instruction? Does it include media literacy and news literacy skills? How can we support the teachers in getting these kinds of resources into the hands of students? Our young people are at no deficit for information. What they need is skills and time to develop discernment, to know which sources are trustworthy and then how to use them. So I love that question too. I mean, that's a great essential question, open-ended, not one answer, and really appropriate for all ages. So I would encourage you, if you have a school or a community that you're a part of, take that question to the people that are in charge of programming. And like Jenny said, and I know Jenny wrote that down, and we will see it come to fruition in some way at the library. So be engaged with the young people and really push for this kind of programming.
I appreciate you saying that, Tricia, because I come from a family of teachers. I'm all about supporting the teachers. I saw a note in the chat, and thank you. That's awesome that one of our KU professors, go Jayhawks, Rob Chalk, really part of the reason for recording this is because if you can't attend this live and ask your questions live, we want to still make sure you have access to the information, to our local journalists, and like I've said, to the resources. I'm putting together resource lists, and you know me, I'm a librarian. I love sharing resources. So Emily, you're so right. I use News Literacy Project resources all the time. They have great newsletters like the SIFT that's specifically directed towards educators. Getting Smart About News, which is for people like me who's not necessarily have curriculum to support. There's so many other complementary organizations too. So that's one of those things. If there's a teacher out there who's watching this, I wish somebody would put all that together. If you would like that, you can call me and I will do what I can to support you. There really are just so many cool things. Are there any, we're wrapping up here. We've got about just 10 more minutes left. If there's anything else anybody would like to share, that includes you, Emily, Matt, and Tricia, that'll be great. I learned my lesson on Wednesday. I closed out the recording too soon. And then we had this awesome off camera. I'm like, I wish I had all that on. So I'm not going to end the recording, but I'm just going to leave this open as, what do you have to share? What else is on your mind after listening to us, after talking? Please share. And I'm going to mute for a little while.
Well, I just want to say thanks for having us on and tackling this project, because it is it's very important that we talk about the state of the news media in our country, because it has it's changed a lot since I got into this business almost a decade ago. And I think these are important conversations to have. And I think this is a really important project, the News Literacy Project, a very important project. And I appreciate being a part of it.
delighted to have you. Really, really, truly. And we do have a question that popped up here, and I like this. Is there a question you wished I would have asked that you would want to answer? I love it.
I feel like very often folks ask me about how anonymity is chosen for sources. And when I decide to grant that, I think that's a really important question. And I think it has a large part in why people distrust national media as much as they do. So anonymous sources, ask me about them anytime. As far as the Beacon goes, we have very strict criteria. I'm always willing to talk to someone off the record, but in order to be quoted as an anonymous source, I have to have very specific reasons. Generally, that your name being in there could harm either your physical health, your job prospects, so on and so forth. If you're a minor, and I think your voice is really important, that's an instance where I would consider it. I will not grant anonymity if someone wants to give a quote to the local newspaper saying that they hate this elected official and they're a scumbag, and I just don't want to say it with my name attached because that could make me look bad. I don't know a single journalist, especially in the local market, that would ever allow that to happen. But there definitely is the perception that we allow people to use anonymity to get away from the consequences of what they're saying. And I really wish that I could talk to more people about exactly how anonymity works, and that it's actually much rarer than people think in news.
What I always try to do if someone approaches me with some information as an anonymous source is I'll try to get somebody to back that up that'll go on the record, because we're TV. It takes a lot of work to get the voice deepener and black out the background and things like that. So that's very rare that we do that, and hardly ever happens with us. So if someone might come and tell me, hey, this is going on, okay, that's great. Do you want to talk about it and do an interview? Oh, no. Well, let me find someone who will. Those anonymous sources, if you want to call them, I will almost never cite them unless it has been vetted on several layers. What I will use is I will use those people who might tell me something off the record to craft my questions better to a local elected official, or to see how I might be able to craft my story in a different way, knowing this piece of information. Can I get it confirmed? Can I not get it confirmed? And if it's not confirmed, obviously I'm not gonna run with it, because I've had a lot of people tell me a big pile of bull many, many times. But you make sure that you can find the facts to back up whatever anybody might tell you off the record. So I always take anybody that says I want to go off the record, especially if it's an official or something like that, I take anything they say with a very big grain of salt. Yeah, and that's a great point. Anonymous sourcing, that the national media uses that far too often. In fact, I saw something recently that a company spokesperson for I don't know, Target, or Walmart or something like that, sent an email to a reporter saying, here is, you can't quote me. I'm the official spokesperson. Here's a quote, but it's only on background. You can't actually quote it. That's ridiculous. I mean, and that's the PR side of things, that if they have tried to cover their butts as much as they possibly can by saying, well, I'll just say this to the journalist and they have to follow it because they do. And I think, I can't remember which publication, but maybe Vox or something like that, said, we're not doing that anymore, period. So I think that's a very good idea, is that sometimes sources, especially public relations officials or elected officials, try to abuse that. And that's something that we have to be on the lookout for now, because people are so fearful to attach their name to almost anything, even an official statement from Target as a company spokesperson, So that's a lot. It's an important topic that Emily brought up.
Yeah, I would say really quickly, it is not just companies that do this either. When I was reporting in Jeff, I had a senator who will not be named that would have a spokesperson give us statements. But if we ran the statement saying it was from this specific spokesperson, they'd get angry at us and not want to talk to us. And at that point, you just have to put your foot down. Like, there's no wiggle room there. I'm not going to stand for that. You either talk to me or you don't, but I'm going to get the story regardless.
Thank you very much for bringing up anonymous sources. I will also include, I made another note that in the wrap up, I'll include even some news literacy project resources about anonymous sources and how they're anonymous to you, the reader, but on the other side, they've been fully vetted. And speaking of vetting, Amanda asks the question, how do you vet someone as an expert to provide context or interviews, especially in new or emerging fields?
I think as local journalists, we sometimes have an easier time of this, especially because we are in an area that has tons of colleges. So we already have a lot of academics in the area that have researched at length, spoken at length about these issues. When it comes to vetting, if I'm talking to someone about something that I'm completely out of my depth on, like, I don't know, biochemistry, I want to see that they've published. If I'm looking to them as an academic, I want to see that they've published peer review articles. I want to be able to talk to other people in their field and have them tell me the same exact things. I think where journalists go wrong sometimes is relying on that one golden goose expert in order to make slot. And I understand we are on a time crunch, but I always want to make sure that my expert information is being corroborated by at least one other expert. That question of newer emerging fields is really interesting. Amanda, if you want to chime in on what fields you're thinking of here, I might be able to give you a better idea. I know when climate change first started coming up as an issue, we had an issue of national outlets just running anyone with an opinion as an expert, which has contributed a lot to climate denialism now. So there's definitely still work to be done there. And quote unquote, science is ever changing, but I do think we should always look towards the empirical data we have and make sure that we are only giving people a platform if they have a proven track record of talking through that empirical data rather than opinions.
Yeah, and something else that we do, especially as broadcasters, is I've been in this market for 8 years, so I know a lot of people, and we've talked to a lot of experts that we have vetted many times before. For example, one that comes to mind is our local FBI experts that we talk to often. Jeff Lanza, who used to be the special agent in charge of the Kansas City Bureau of the FBI. So we'll go to him often because we know him and he talks candidly and things like that. Other experts that we've talked to a lot includes a lot of doctors over the last couple of years. I think Dr. Stephen Stites is a common household name now. He's the top doctor over at KU. So a lot of it comes down to as well is who are the people that we know, because we do live in this community. So that's part of it too. And I agree with Emily that we do need to make sure we're vetting people, because there will be people that I'll meet at a protest or something like that. Well, I am an expert on masks, and this is the research that I've done, or something like that. I might present that person as a protester, but I will not present them as an expert, because they've Googled something and they've gotten their, Breitbart News says this. Okay, right. No. So it is an interesting people that want to say they're experts, and there's a lot of people who think they are, that they're simply not.
Oh, that's great. Amanda says, thank you for your thoughtful answers there. And we're closing out. It's 1 o'clock. It's been a real joy to be with all of you today. I want to say thank you to Matt and to Emily, to Tricia, to all of you who were here today and who will be watching this recording sometime in the future. And I wanted to share too that in the chat, we have some participants who say, we sure wish you had more time reporting. Didn't have to do that in that 1 minute and change. We'd love to hear longer stories. At least I'm paraphrasing there with, let's hear more.
Well, I will mention that we have started doing at Channel 9 something we call Chronicles. These are hour-long documentaries that we have started doing as of a couple of years ago. And these are super important topics that we dive into and really get into the meat of things. And I wish I had more time too. And sometimes I can get more time and I can fight for it, but I have to choose when to play those chips. You know what I mean? So if I go and fight for 2 minutes every day, I'm not gonna get it whenever I really need 2 minutes. So
Here comes Matt.
right, I completely agree. But yes, we are doing some very in-depth reporting. In fact, I'm working on one right now, which is gonna really happen over the summer. But the MR 340 river race, that where these crazy people go from Kansas City to St. Louis in the middle of July. So we're gonna do an hour-long documentary on that race, but also on the Missouri River and how the Missouri River has shaped our communities and how it continues to shape our communities as the river is changing, quite honestly, because of climate change. A lot of people will just imagine the polar ice caps melting, and people in Missouri say, well, it's not my problem. Well, a lot of that affects the Missouri River, which all of us see every day. And we saw in 2019, most recently, how powerful the river can be and devastating it can be with the latest rounds of bad floods we had. So we are doing that. We are working on it to get more in-depth things out there. So it is something that we have that we have really taken a big step forward with our new news director who started here about 4 years ago. So I think we're really making some inroads there.
That's awesome, Matt. Also, shout out from Elizabeth saying, please see the show at the Kemper Museum on the Missouri River. That those are some good visuals. And that's going to bring us to the end of our program. Again, it's been a joy to be with all of you today. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for sharing your expertise, Matt and Emily. And I have a lot of resources to share with you as part of the wrap up email. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, and take good care. Stay healthy. Thank you so much.